It's July 2023, and last week was the 77th anniversary of the King David Hotel bombing in Jerusalem. Actually, there are multiple anniversaries here because the USS Liberty, which is an American ship, was also blown up in June during the Six-Day War, so 1967, 8th of June. And, King David Hotel bombing was July 22nd, 1946. So there are multiple anniversaries here of Israeli Zionist terrorism that I wanted to talk about because they're very important. And of course, the Lavon Affair, which is another issue. And I wanted to kind of get into all of them to show you that Israel has not just a tendency towards extremism and violence, but was founded from the very beginning on these things, right? You shouldn't think that, well, Israel is becoming violent because, there are people protesting against Netanyahu and now it was a democracy and now it's going to fall into tyranny. No. This is nothing new. So originally, how this started out is you had Zionism as a political ideology that was created in Europe, okay? And the idea was that European Jews, notably European Jews, but Jews in the diaspora in general, would emigrate to Palestine, okay? And based on this political ideology, okay, Zionism is a political ideology. It's not a religion. It's not a race. It's a political ideology. Based on that, they would take Palestine and turn it into Israel, right, by force. So you have waves of people that are going from Poland, from Ukraine, from basically everything that was the Russian Empire, mostly, right? I mean, if you look at the list of Israeli prime ministers, every single Israeli prime minister in history is Eastern European, right? The first, Ben Gurion, for example, where was he born? Former Russian Empire, right? All of them. If they weren't born in the Russian Empire or Eastern Europe, then it's either their parents or grandparents. Doesn't change the fact that they emigrated there and then took up arms. And how did this start? Well, first you had something called the Bar Giora, right? So Bar Giora is a militia, which is really the precursor to what is today the Israeli army, okay? So very, very violent group, extremely violent, using guerrilla tactics to assassinate Arabs, to assassinate British officers, to assassinate even other Jews, right? So Jews who were not okay with Zionism, who disagreed with Zionism, with this political ideology, they assassinated them too. This is a fact. This is very well historically documented. You can go read something, for example, by Ronan Bergman, where he goes into detail about this. Then after Bar Giora turned into what is known as HaShomer, okay? Became HaShomer. Then HaShomer became the Haganah, okay? And when the Haganah came about, you had a split because you had people in the Haganah. Remember, it's the same, Hebrew, as they called it, Zionist militia, okay? You had a split. And out of the Haganah, you had the Stern Gang, okay, so also called Lehi, and you had the Irgun, all right? Now, Irgun and Lehi, they believed in being even more extremist. But at the end of the day, it's the same people, really. I mean, they all went on to become the IDF. They all went on to become the prime ministers of Israel. So what's the difference? It's not like there was much wiggle room. By the time they disagreed with each other, and we're talking about the King David Hotel bombing, for example, it's already 1946. What's there left to disagree about? 2 years later, they've taken Palestine. So in any case, the King David Hotel bombing, look at this. This is the headquarters in Jerusalem of the British Empire, the British mandate in Palestine. And that's what they did to it. Okay? They blew it up. These are, again, European Jews of the Irgun. Now, the Haganah, as I told you, they had a split with Haganah. Haganah claimed that, they called off the operation at the last second, and they were not okay with this, and then they helped, MI5 and SIS track down members of Irgun and so on. But, they helped plan it. This entire plan came out of Haganah and Irgun working together. That's a fact. So they blew it up. They killed 96 people. 96 people. Most of them were working for the British government. Okay, so 28 of them were British, 41 Arabs. There were even 17 Jews among the dead. So you see how indiscriminate this is. This is not about, the Israelis targeting, their quote unquote enemies. They don't give a crap. They were killing other Jews, everybody, right? The same groups that I mentioned before. Nothing has changed. And this is funny because in their point of view, the Zionist militias back then, they thought that this is acceptable violence because the goal is to liberate Palestine and then turn it into Israel. Okay, that this is their homeland, even though they all come from Poland and Ukraine. But somehow it's their homeland, and that justifies this violence. It's funny because when Palestinians who you have documented proof, they literally have keys to the houses, deeds to the land. They can prove going back 10, 20 generations that they have lived in this land, Palestinians. When they try to take up arms, which is their right, by the way, this is enshrined in the Geneva Convention and the UN Charter. When they do that, they're called terrorists, right? How many times have you heard Israel call Palestinian resistance fighters terrorists? Or not just Israel, but the UK and the US and the West in general. There's no difference here, right? It's the same thinking. It's like, this is my homeland and I'm going to do whatever it takes to liberate it. The difference here is that the Israelis have no claim to this because they are European. They are Ashkenazi. They're, from Poland, from Ukraine, from Russia. They blew this up. They blew this up because you had stations, MI5 stations, MI6 or SIS stations here. So they basically put bombs in a bunch of milk cans, milk tins, and they put them in the basement. And it was so powerful that basically the entire hotel collapsed. And that's what happened. 96 people killed. And the Israelis claim that they issued phone calls in advance, right? It's kind of like when they bomb Palestinian buildings, residential buildings, and they say, listen, we're going to call you 10 minutes before we destroy your entire life, and that means you should get out. Oh, well, thank you very much. So the Israelis claim that this whole bombing is the fault of the British. It's our fault because we didn't evacuate the hotel fast enough. So the thing is actually that the French, there was a wing, one of the wings of this hotel was also part of the French consulate, right? So you have a lot of things going on here, right? This hotel was basically the headquarters for, as I said, British intelligence, the British mandate in Palestine, but also one wing was belonged to the French and so on. So the Israelis claim they called one of the operators downstairs at the switchboard, and the call was ignored, apparently, according to them. Then they say that they called the French consulate, right? So the other wing in this hotel. And then they claim they called a newspaper, which then notified the British. But it turns out all of this was a lie. They cooked this up in order to frame the British. And to add insult to injury, in 2006, Israel unveiled a plaque at the hotel, right? Because they annexed and invaded all of this. This is the plaque which they unveiled. So they had a conference, and Netanyahu, who is now the prime minister again, but in 2006 he was no longer the prime minister. He was gone for a little while. He attended this conference, and they were basically commemorating a terrorist attack. And the plaque read, this is something unbelievable. The plaque read that, to reasons known only to the British government, the hotel was not evacuated. So you see again this mentality, like, we are going to blow this hotel up, and if anybody dies, it's your fault because you didn't evacuate it. Wow. Even Haaretz, this is an Israeli newspaper, Haaretz. I want you to read what they say here because I think it's beautiful how they point out this hypocrisy. Okay? Look at what they said here. They said if Netanyahu's office were to receive a bomb threat, do you think he would evacuate? And then, were he to fail to evacuate, that he would then blame it upon himself? Of course not. This is an Israeli newspaper saying this, not me. Just to show you how hypocritical this is. And this is so insulting, this plaque. This is so insulting that they had the British government and the British embassy protested, and they had to change the text, but only in English. So you see the plaque is in Hebrew on the top, and in the bottom it's in English. They only changed the English text, and the one in Hebrew, from my understanding, I don't read Hebrew, but if anybody does, please feel free to chime in. This is reported everywhere and well documented that the text in Hebrew was not changed, and it remains unaltered, and this plaque is still there, and it blames our government for not evacuating the hotel fast enough, which I think is I mean, you know, calling this insulting is a little mild. It's a little mild. Okay. Now you need to understand something, because the threat of Zionist terrorism was so big that at the end of World War II, remember this is 1946, MI5 were more concerned with Israeli terrorism, with Zionist terrorism, than the Soviets. So let that sink in, because people, you know, they think like World War II was, you know, the Soviets and the British and the Americans and Canadians and, you know, Anzac fighting, and the Chinese fighting against the Axis powers. And then once they were done, you had the Soviets versus the West, right? It's not true. The main concern for MI5, at least, were Zionist cells, because the Zionist militias like Haganah and Irgun were planning attacks inside the UK. And they carried them out. They delivered on these threats, right? So they blew up the Colonial Club in London, right? Although, given its name, I'm not sure there will be too many who'll weep. But nevertheless, you know, it's a terrorist attack. Then on top of that, they tried to blow up Whitehall, but the timer failed, so the bomb didn't go off. But if it had gone off, it would have been just as bad as King David Hotel in Whitehall, right? And when it comes to immigration, every single Jewish person in the Middle East who wanted to take out a visa to go to the United Kingdom at the end of World War II, every single one was scrutinized by MI5 and the security services. Every single one. That is how I'm trying to illustrate to you how serious this threat of Zionist terrorism was to the United Kingdom, which helped create Israel, right? Remember Balfour Declaration, 1917, and then this becomes such a headache, all of this, that the UK just dumps it onto the UN. And of course, the Americans are not helping the UK, because, you know, the Israeli lobby is much, much stronger and receives a lot more funding and support in the United States versus the UK. And so, you know, the US becoming the new superpower and overshadowing France and the UK. What can you do, right? I mean, it doesn't make it any better, but I'm just trying to explain to you that there was the UK at this point, even if it had wanted to put a stop to, you know, the creation of Israel, which I doubt it did, it couldn't have anyway, because the United States was funding and supporting Zionism so much that the UK had no say in this, right? Remember, the final nail in the coffin is the Suez Canal crisis, but that's later. That's a decade later. So just going back to the British approach, you know, in 1939, there was something called the White Paper, which is basically a decree limiting the number of Jewish migrants to Palestine to around 75,000 per year. Okay, so this was a cap. And once again, at the end of World War II, just to illustrate how serious this was taken, the threat of Israeli terrorism, this cap was not lifted. Okay, so it was kept in place. Now, the Israelis, as I said, they were sending, you know, putting bombs all over London. They were also sending bombs from throughout Europe in letter bombs, and even in books, right? So they pride themselves in being the inventors of the book bomb. Okay. Then we come to the USS Liberty. Then we come to another Israeli attack on a so-called ally. Okay, so this is the 8th of June, 1967. The Israelis kill 34 U.S. service members. Among them is an NSA civilian employee, and I think 2 United States Marine Corps service members. And all in all, you have 171 people who are wounded. You know, this is basically like 2/3 of the crew. Now, this was a spy ship. Okay, the USS Liberty was a spy ship. So the way that they refer to these ships was AGTR, right? So it's an auxiliary technical research ship. Whenever you hear a bunch of words mashed up together under a US title, I can guarantee you 99.9% it's something to do with the NSA or the CIA. Lo and behold, it's an NSA ship. Confirmed. This is a spy ship. Okay? Now, granted, the ship wasn't doing anything wrong. It's a clearly marked United States vessel, and it's in international waters. Now here, once again, what do we have? We have the Israelis trying to justify their acts of terrorism. They claimed that they didn't know this was an American ship, right? They thought it was an Egyptian ship pretending to be an American one. I mean, if you buy that, you are the most supreme of all suckers to have ever sucked. Truly. If you think the Israelis thought this was an Egyptian ship, to reiterate, the USS Liberty was a clearly marked United States vessel. It was in international waters. And the Israelis pretend and claim that they had submitted a request to the Americans asking about the locations of US ships in the Mediterranean Sea in advance. And this was a complete lie. They only submitted this request after they had already attacked the USS Liberty. What makes this all the more disturbing and disgusting is that to this day, the United States provides Israel with not only political cover, but billions of dollars every single year in weapons, in military aid, $3.8 billion a year. Even after the Israelis openly killed 34 United States sailors, wounded hundreds of American service members, and then pretended that it didn't know that this was an American ship. That is completely disgusting. Let me read to you just a short excerpt here. This is from the History Channel. So, the USS Liberty was suddenly attacked by Israeli torpedo boats who launched torpedoes and fired artillery at the ship. Under the command of its wounded captain, William McGonigal, the Liberty managed to avert 4 torpedoes, but one struck the ship at the waterline. Heavily damaged, the ship launched 3 lifeboats, but these were also attacked, which is a violation of international law. Even if it's a military submarine or a vessel, if you see people bailing out, and getting into lifeboats, you can't shoot them. You have to help them, even if they're your enemy. They become your prisoners of war, and you must take care of them, right? So the Israelis not only attacked the U.S. ship, they even attacked the lifeboats. What did they think? These were Egyptian soldiers dressed as Americans climbing into lifeboat. Even if they were Egyptians, how can you attack a lifeboat? They did. So, heavily damaged, the ship launched 3 lifeboats. They were attacked, and failing to sink the Liberty, which displaced 10,000 tons, the Israelis finally desisted. Israel later apologized for the attack and offered $6.9 million in compensation, claiming it had mistaken the Liberty for an Egyptian ship. However, Liberty survivors and some former U.S. officials believe that the attack was deliberate, staged to conceal Israel's pending seizure of Syria's Golan Heights, which occurred the next day. Lo and behold, the 6-Day War, the period during which this took place, is exactly when Israel took East Jerusalem, right? And took the Golan Heights and then the Sinai Peninsula, but then, of course, it made peace with Egypt, or rather was forced to make peace with Egypt. Excuse me, the Egyptians were forced to make peace with Israel. In any case, the Syrian Golan Heights are occupied to this day. Right now, as I'm speaking to you in 2023, nothing has changed. Those lines have not moved. So you do understand why they did this. This is a spy ship. These are American spies, okay? They are doing a signal intelligence, okay? Signals intelligence. So they're intercepting communications, meaning the radio traffic from the Israelis. They're cracking the codes. They're decrypting it and listening to what they're saying. And they understand, oh, that's what the Israelis intend to take the Golan Heights. That's why the Israelis sunk the ship. I wanted to mention one thing before. I had skipped a paragraph when I wanted to start reading, because when I mentioned the torpedoes, this is after they had already attacked the ship. So you understand there are multiple parts to this incident. Okay, so this begins with the Israelis bombing it with aircraft and firing napalm and rockets. You know, if napalm gets on your skin, you're in trouble. Even if it gets on your clothes, you're in trouble. Everything will be gone, clean off. So they used napalm and rockets. The Liberty attempted to radio for assistance, but the Israeli aircraft blocked the transmissions. Just think of how cruel that is. So the Israelis know that the Americans are sending out a distress call, and they block it. They jam it. I guess they thought it was an Egyptian ship. Eventually, the ship was able to make contact with the U.S. carrier Saratoga, and 12 fighter jets and 4 tanker planes were dispatched to defend the Liberty. When word of their deployment reached Washington, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara ordered them recalled to the carrier, and they never reached the Liberty. The reason for their recall remains unclear. So Robert McNamara is, another war criminal, and his history in Vietnam is rather extensive. Right? You tell me why he recalled 12 American planes from helping out a U.S. ship with 34 U.S. service members killed. I mean, look at the size of that thing. Let's talk about the Lavon Affair. Lavon Affair. So this is named after an Israeli defense minister. Okay, and he had to resign. And this caused a scandal inside of Israel because someone had launched Operation Susanna, and no one would take responsibility for it, right? And once again, this gets very weird because at first the Israelis are all denying it. The prime minister says it wasn't me, and then the defense minister says I didn't do it either. And then mysteriously, 60 years later, Israel is honoring the agents who carried out this attack. Why would you honor agents that you have nothing to do with? So let's look at Operation Susanna, or the Lavon Affair. This is in 1954. Keep in mind, this is very, very shortly after Nasser, right? Probably the most famous Arab president in history, right? Who was a strong supporter of the Palestinian cause. He was the most popular president, not just in Egypt, but as I said, the entire Arab world. When he died, you had millions, literally millions of people in the streets. Millions. Staunch supporter of pan-Arabism. So when he takes power, he opposes Zionism. The Israelis hate him. So the Israelis send a sleeper cell, or rather activate a sleeper cell, Mossad agents who are inside Egypt, to start carrying out attacks. And these are false flag attacks. So they are meant to make the Egyptian government look bad, so that there's a rift between Egypt and the United States and Britain. Or blame it on the Muslim Brotherhood, blame it on the Egyptian communists, blame it on Nasser. It doesn't matter. But make it look like it's not the Israelis. So who do you think they attacked? The Israelis, on July 2nd in 1954, blew up the Alexandria post office in Egypt. Then on July 14th, they blew up 2 U.S. consular libraries. So again, these are official, U.S. government buildings, right? Or rather, projects and buildings. So this is one library in Cairo, and the other one is in Alexandria. Then on July 23rd, they blew up 2 cinemas, a railway station, and a central post office in Cairo. The idea here was also, to blow up British-owned and American-owned buildings. One of them being an MGM cinema. And so, while this was happening, the Egyptians started to understand what was happening, and they wrapped up the entire cell. And then they put all of the 11 Israeli agents on trial in public, and they confessed to everything. Right? Philip Nathanson was literally, caught on the way to a cinema where he was about to blow up. The bomb actually exploded in his pocket. And while he was on the way to blow it up, there was a fire truck already waiting outside the cinema to put out, the eventual fire from his terrorist attack. So the man who ran the cell was named John Darling. That's a fake name, right? He was a Mossad agent. And so, as I said, this was a sleeper cell made up of Egyptian Jews. And what the Israelis were doing is very, very bad, because not only were they trying to blow up American and British establishments and kill, while doing is potentially kill not just Egyptians, but also, foreigners, whether they're British or American. They like to claim, it was a safe terrorist attack because they planted these bombs at night. And I just told you, one of the Mossad agents on the way to planting the thing blew himself up. How do you know that he wouldn't have maybe hurt somebody else? You don't. So, this idea that, Israel never does dangerous terrorist attacks. It's always, they will call the hotel before it happens, if it's the King David Hotel, or they'll warn the Americans beforehand or some crap, No, this is rubbish. So what they did here is they exploited the Egyptian Jewish community, right? So what the Israelis will say is that, the Arab governments kicked out all the Jews. It's a complete lie. Completely made up. Israel did this on purpose in Iraq, for example, in 1950, 1951. Israel blew up synagogues, so Jewish temples. Let me repeat that. Israel sent Mossad agents to blow up Jewish synagogues inside Iraq so that Iraqi Jews who are living there would become, scared and just leave and pack up and go live in Israel. And now, just, going back to the Lavon Affair, so in 1954, in Egypt, there are 50,000 Jews who live in Egypt at this point. 50,000 Jews. Where do you think they all are now? They're in Israel. So, one way or another, this was going to be a win-win for Israel. Either they cause a rift between Egypt and the United States and Britain, and, they make it look like Nasser is an incapable leader. He can't keep foreigners safe. He can't keep his own people safe. He's too, incompetent to take control of the Suez Canal. That's 2 years later, remember? So this is a big, big issue at the time. Or they get Jews so scared that they just emigrate and come live in Israel. Now, why do you think Israel wants this policy? Because Israelis are a minority. Israelis are a minority who rule over a majority. There are more Palestinians in Palestine than Israelis. Go figure, because this is Palestine. So, a bunch of European Jews who are coming here are obviously going to be a minority. Now, the thing is, in order to legitimize Israel as a country, it's not enough. It's not enough to become a UN member state. Israel needs to increase the population. Israel wants to market itself and portray itself as the Jewish state. You always hear this phrase, the Jewish state. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, because if you listen to the Israeli propaganda, the Hasbara, they would have you believe that before, the 1890s, before Zionism was invented, there were no Jews, which is ridiculous, because you've had Jews for thousands of years. But they make it seem like Zionism and Judaism are one and the same, when they're clearly not. One is a religion, the other one's a political ideology that was just recently invented in Europe. So this worked out very well for the Israelis, because, they, despite getting caught, as I said, 50,000 Jews were put at risk, and then they felt, scared, because now the Egyptian government had rolled up a sleeper cell, a Mossad sleeper cell. And once again, going back to my original point, Israel recruited and used Egyptian Jews to carry out these attacks. It used its own community. This put 50,000 Jews in Egypt at risk, and they fled and increased the Israeli population. And they did the same thing in Iraq. Now, in Iraq, when we talk about these synagogue bombings in 1950, 1951, one of those bombings, yes, there's more than one. One of those bombings, it's not clear whether it was Mossad or not. The other bombings were definitely Mossad. Mossad is Israel's intelligence service, right? They were absolutely Mossad. And the fact that Israel is ready to blow up Jewish temples, I mean, this is disgusting. I think it tells you everything you need to know, right? It's like, at all costs, they'll do whatever it takes. You know, Israel doesn't care about its own people. It claims to be the Jewish state, and clearly it uses Jews in other countries to carry out its political goals. It blows up Jewish temples in Jewish synagogues in other countries to achieve its goals. Israel doesn't care about Jews. Israel hijacks Judaism to use it as a political vehicle for Zionism. Israel doesn't care about its allies. The UK, you know, shamefully, the UK helped Israel to become, the colony that it is today. The Balfour Declaration of 1917, you know, with the UK Foreign Secretary promising a Jewish state in Palestine. Who is our Foreign Secretary to promise a state anywhere for anyone? Do I need to pick up the globe again and remind you that, you know, Palestine is down here, okay, and the UK is up here? What the hell do these two things have to do with each other? Colonialism. So then, not only that, but in 1946 and 47 and 48, as I told you, with the King David Hotel bombing and this threat of Zionist terrorism in London and across the UK, the United Kingdom and Whitehall, they just give up this whole thing to the United Nations and dump it, you know, and they're like, screw it, you know, let them take over, let them get what they want. And we're in 2023 and this whole issue has still not been resolved. Palestinians, you know, are still living under colonialism. It just switched from Turkish to British to Jewish, or rather European Zionism. Yep. That's it. So you've had 500 years of occupation in the Middle East, Ottoman, British, and French, and now Israeli and American. What good has that done people there? Nothing. And the attacks on the USS Liberty, you know, the fact Israel pays a few $100 million, what does that change? I'm telling you, the people on that ship, it's not my opinion, I'm telling you, the people on the ship are saying, we don't buy this story that Israel mistook us for an Egyptian ship. Israel knew this was an American vessel, that there were American soldiers on board, and Israel fired on purpose because they were American, because they knew what Israel was about to do in Syria. And, you know, the Israelis claim that, you know, they had asked the Americans in advance, please tell us where your ships are in the Mediterranean Sea so we don't accidentally fire upon you. This is a lie, because the government in Washington quickly spoke to the U.S. ambassador in Israel to confirm this, and he said this is a lie. No one ever asked me to pass on this information, or rather to pass on this request to give the Israelis the location of American ships. The Israelis only did this after they had blown up the USS Liberty, after the fact. Once again, so, you know, the Israelis, they're ready to carry out terrorist attacks against their own people, or you know, who they claim are their own people. They are ready to attack their own allies, the UK, the US. And what is our response? We applaud them and give them money. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. We are not going to applaud Ashkenazi Zionist terrorism for killing our compatriots. And we are not going to applaud them for what they're doing in Palestine and what they're doing in Syria. You know, even if Israel had never killed a single American soldier or a British officer, they would still be terrorists and they would still be oppressors in Palestine. This is the quintessential issue and problem with the Israeli colony in Palestine, that it's a colony. Do you understand? It's not just apartheid, and it's not an apartheid state, it's a colony, it's a European colony, and it's never been anything but outrageous. Truly, truly outrageous. And this plaque, this disgusting plaque, like Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, is commemorating a terrorist attack against British officers. What the hell is that shit? If the people in Whitehall had any self-respect, a shred of self-respect, they would have called the UK ambassador back to London and kicked the Israeli embassy out and severed ties. Try doing that. Try commemorating an attack against Israelis and see what happens to you. See how they will hit the fucking roof Oh my God, you're anti-Semitic. Oh, you're a terrorist. Oh, you're this and that. But it's okay for the Israelis to blow us up, to kill us, and then commemorate it and unveil a plaque. You know, they're proud of themselves. Wow, we're so brave. You know, we invented book bombs and letter bombs and blew up a hotel full of Jews, full of Arabs, full of British officers. Now, granted, there should have been no British secretary in Palestine in the first place. I'm the first one to tell you that. But don't let the Israelis fool you for a second. They are terrorists, and they have no claim and no justification for this behavior. None whatsoever. These are people from Poland, from Ukraine. You know, right-wing people, they like to complain about refugees, quote-unquote, invading Europe. Jesus, you should see what Europeans do when they go to Africa and Asia. You want to talk about invasions? You want to talk about an invasion? Israel is an invasion, literally an invasion. Not refugees. Paramilitaries. Fanatics, extremists. Only a fanatic behaves like this. This is fanaticism. It's extremism, religious extremism. And again, I told you before, ISIS, Israel, the Crusaders, they all hijack religion and use it as a political vehicle. Israel is no different. And they are not our friends and not our allies.